Hello and welcome to K-Wave 6 Radio. This is your host, Kirk Spencer. Today, I'm going to do a little bit different. We started with this just last week, Thursday. Over the past few months, we've been doing shows that are very proactive, but showing people that have started their businesses either at an early age or even very late in their age, finding what their niche is and working towards that. In other words, showing you, the listener, that you can do what you dream about doing. You can create your dreams and make them happen. And whether they're something that you start early in your age or start later in your age, you can get them done. And there's always someone out there to help you get there, but first you have to start with your own thoughts. We're going to go a little bit more on a proactive side. Today, we're doing a show with an old-time friend of mine, a very intelligent man. He is a polymath. Polymath. I encourage you to look that up so you understand what it means. He has a wide range of interests and a wide range of abilities, and he's going to only talk about two things today. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Troy Mathisen. We're going to talk about energy and how it helps in health and even has curative properties. And we're also going to talk about, later on in the show, about his involvement in national and international law. This is a very interesting show, and it's going to show you, the listener, about what you can do, not only in the same vein that we've been talking about before, about how to take something that's your dream and make it a reality, but also how you can get involved in making our world a better place. So without further ado, here's Troy Mathisen. And Troy, if you will, just start from beginning. What got you interested in all these things that you
like to start?
have started on and have created along the lines?
Okay. Well, my background began as a engineer in audio. I, at a young age, realized that I was absolutely in love with music. And going back before my professional endeavors, I pretty much spent all of my time learning how to play piano, learning voice, percussion, and horns, various horns. I played trumpet, I played sousaphone, trombone, and tuba. Did not have the embouchure to play French horn, which was one of my favorite horns, but I just didn't have the right lip shape or something. I don't know. Maybe it was my teeth. But anyway, loved music, and so I really focused on that heavily. I had kind of an awakening. Well, that was the first one, but when I was 11 years old, my dad pulled the money together to buy an Atari Pong game, one of those set-top boxes for the TV set, so we could sit there and play Pong. And I had a flash of brilliance, as it were, a stroke of whatever, and realized that someday computers would be able to draw more than just a couple of paddles and a line down the center of the screen with a ball that moves around that was able to interact with those paddles, or not. Yeah, and it fascinated me. And so I imagined that someday computers would be able to draw virtually anything you could imagine onto the screen. Well, my favorite genre of film are the science fiction, fantasy, adventure types of films. I could watch those all day long, every day, if only I had the time. But so I kind of had this image in my mind that I need to learn more about how to make records, because the songs that I was writing in my head, I was hearing specific sound qualities and wanted to know how to achieve those through a recording process. So that was really what led me into audio engineering. I didn't really get heavily into graphic design and animation stuff until 87. And by then I'd been pretty much about 10 years into my professional endeavors as an audio engineer. I started avidly learning how to do 3D modeling, rendering, and animation at that point. My passion really became multimedia development in general. So I spent years studying video production, worked within the film industry for over a 14-year period. Still pretty much all along focused on my engineering background, which actually expanded from just audio engineering into electronics engineering. I ended up going on as a wiring technician with a company down in Sun Valley, California. I ended up working with those folks for about 6 years as a electronic prototype developer. So generally my background has been engineering up until about a couple of years ago. Now, going back a little bit more, in the mid-90s, I ran into an issue where I was having a hard time getting my work out there. At that time, as far as my music work and stuff, it involved getting the equivalent of a record deal so that I could afford to produce the hard media, CDs and whatnot. And I started looking into, hey, the web has finally developed to the point where I could actually deliver soft media. So I dove heavily into software programming, basically web application development in 1995. Built my first website at the very end of that year. And I've pretty much been focusing on information technology as my main focus over the last, 18 years or so. But I ended up having another interest come along in the mid-2000s. In July of 2005, I got involved with some folks that were working within the realms of humanitarian aid. And I got involved with a group called Social Networking International and started talking with people there, pretty much just replying to their posts. I wasn't really creating any posts of my own that people could comment on. I just did a lot of commenting on people's posts. And before I knew it, got actively engaged with some new friends that came along and sent me friend requests. And I started delving more and more into law at that point. I ended up getting involved with the town I was living in North Carolina at a official capacity. I was pretty much privy to all kinds of information that was going back and forth between the town commissioners. I also acted as a liaison between the local police department and the county sheriff. And I was actually privy to all kinds of information they probably shouldn't have had me privy to because I hadn't really signed any papers. Nothing was really legal, as it were, at that point. But I did have trust, which was phenomenal. It was a blessing. And so I starting to look at not only international law at that point, but studying state, local, and federal laws. And so it was really just a hobby because I was still working as a technologist, basically an IT director type or developer type, and both really. And in 2010, I had another one of those little brain farts and imagined a way to describe pure energy space without regard for matter. And so I started developing this theory, the quantum theory, and didn't get too far along before I realized, well, this is all fine and good, but it's just a theory. I needed a way to show that this is applicable in some way. So I ended up having yet another brain fart and came up with an inductance coil. And I used a system that while I was going through my research, came across a coil design that was created by a gentleman named Marco Rodin. He came up with a thing called the Rodin coil. And I was looking at it, and somewhere I came across a graph that showed a non-uniform curve. It was basically kind of like a flat line curve that came up to a beautiful peak. It was a nice slope up. But on what's called the truncate of that slope, there was a little bump out, almost kind of looked like Mount Hood a little bit in Oregon. And I was like, well, that's interesting. If this is producing a mathematically uniform field from an abstract concept, why is there a little bump out on one side? Shouldn't that be perfectly uniform? Because if I was to take that curve and wrap it into a circle, it would be a circle with a dent in it. And I looked at that and compared it against my map and, pardon me, came up with a different map where there was no anomaly in the curve, and therefore a generally spherical waveform. So I wanted to get into that. I also looked at some other applications for my system and started thinking from that particular think space. It's based on a nonative system, 9 instead of a base 10 system. So it's a base 9 system. And I started looking into that. I've also had, as I mentioned, an extensive background in sound engineering and design, and ended up coming up with an interesting little thing that I call a kinesynoptic, which didn't last very long. But basically what it did, a kinesynoptic is a portmanteau for kinesthetic energy with sonic energy and optical energy. And what I was doing was using sound and light and putting those two together to create a kinesthetic effect on the human physiology. So the problem was these things usually took about 10 minutes to really sink in, and not a lot of people have time to sit and stare at a screen and watch a moving image of color patterns, basically, that are corollary to the audio frequencies I was using. In other words, the color you're seeing is the sound you're hearing from a mathematical standpoint. So I ended up dropping the optical part of the system and just coming up with a new portmanteau, which is the kinesonics. So I'm now using sonic energy to affect a kinesthetic level effect. And so I started working on these kinds of things. I came up with a map that is called the MK111.
Excuse me a moment. Tell us about how these sound waves relieve pain. I know you had some problems long ago, but how did this work for you?
Okay. The MK111 is basically what's called a equilaterally balanced sine wave system, where I'm using 3 different tones. Those 3 tones manifest a 4th tone. And in the case of the MK111, it was for pain relief. I was having some teeth problems, and me being an inventor and generally a starving artist, basically didn't have the means or the healthcare to get my teeth fixed. So I started looking into my background in sound engineering and design, came up with the MK111 using those 3 tones, and actually found out that it worked for reducing my pain. Not only that, it kind of worked like a song does. You know, that you can hear a song just once in your life, maybe not hear it for a year later, but you never forgot that song. You know, you've got that melody burned into your brain. You've got even some of the words perhaps. And so I tried this kinesonic that I created for tooth pain, and it worked great. But it only gave me about 3 or 4 hours of relief. I tried it the next time I got a toothache, which was a day or 2 later, and it worked again on eliminating the pain. So after the 3rd time, I pretty much had that tone imprinted, let's call it. And the 4th time I got a toothache, I just imagined that sound and started getting pain relief. So I guess that sonic energy imprinted some way into my mind that all I had to do was think of that sound and got pain relief. So I sent it out to somebody else that was having some serious back problems, and they tried it out, and it worked great for them. And they recommended that I send it to another friend, and before I knew it, I had about a dozen people that all wanted to try this thing out that had successes with it. So what brought me back into the law was the fact that corporations and government alike are working in collusion to prevent these types of technologies from hitting the market. In fact, there isn't, that I'm aware of, one sonic system on the market for health, wellness conditioning or reconditioning. They would prefer that you go buy their little pills because they can control that, and they make money from that. And every time you need some relief, they're making money. My system is given away for free and does just as good of a job without the side effects. So I started studying the law vigorously in 2011 so that I could learn their game, as it were, and figure out how to basically play by their rules. You know, I didn't want to be sitting here playing checkers while they're playing Monopoly, because I'm not going to be able to challenge them should they choose to challenge me with trying to get these health and wellness conditioning systems out there to people to try. So I ended up coming up with some other maps, as it turns out. I call them maps because it's basically a recipe of 3 different tones. But those 3 tones that are used in each of the kinesonic devices are carefully selected for very specific reasons. So coming back to the MK111, how it manifested was I took one of the 3 tones, which is in the audible range. It's actually 111 cycles, which is hence the name MK111. And I put that in the dead center in the stereo channel. So when you're listening to that monotone, it's just going, ooh. I added a second tone and panned it over to the far left side. That frequency was 4.0 cycles. And I chose that frequency for a very specific reason. And then I added a third tone, which was 2.5 cycles, and panned it to the opposite channel. So when I added the first tone to that boo, it ended up creating a wah-wah effect, even though the second tone is subsonic. You can't record 4 cycles. And it ended up going boo. And then I added the third tone, and it made a more complex polyrhythm that was kind of like more like boo. And so I thought that was interesting. I listened to it. Those 3 frequencies do very specific things. The 111 cycles basically creates a physiological process in which the brain starts producing endorphins. The 4 cycles on the one channel, far side channel, 4.0 cycles is a frequency that stimulates production of enkephalin. The 2.5 cycles is known to optimize pain cell receptors. So I made this thing up using this kind of theory and applying it in a way that I had this tritone system. Oddly enough, the difference between the 2 subsonic tones, which is 1.5 cycles, manifests as a 4th tone that is also a subconscious effect. But 1.5 cycles is known in the scientific community as Abramson's universal healing frequency. So
I'm sorry, we're going to have to take our break right now. We've gone a little bit past our time, but we'll be right back with Troy Mathisen talking more about energy and more to come. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Aloha from Maui, Hawaii. This is Carrie Gray of My Green Insurance at mygreeninsurance.com. Thank you for joining us. We're the first co-op for alternative medicine health coverage. You're listening to us on kwave6radio.tk. Aloha.
Are you ready to put an end to thinking about how you wish it were and take action? Take this step to find out more by going to coachingbyria.com. And you can receive your free consultation session with Coach Ria. Coach Ria is a certified professional life coach with a passion to help make the difference in the world.
Hey everybody, this is Jason Pockrant of Live to Give over at jasonpockrant.com, and you are listening to K-Wave 6 Radio.
Hi, and welcome back to K-Wave 6 Radio. Again, my guest today is Troy Mathisen. And just before the break, we were talking about his MK111, which is M meaning Mathisen, and his frequency is 111. But before we get back into this, Troy, I'd like to ask you if you wouldn't mind talking about those, those 3 tones, and thinking about energy in a world of matter, then law, and can you elaborate some on spirit and body and energy and how all of this works together? and how the spirit and body, well, you know where I'm going from there.
Sure. Well, I did want to cover just elaborate just a little bit more. Aside from the MK111, it really came into being by looking at different systems. The first one I looked at is pretty much considered a pseudoscience called the solfège sequences. And those tones are all based on 369 as a numerical system. So, for example, in music, classical music specifically, the tonal system, the tuning was based around A4 being 432 cycles per second, or hertz. And that was modified back a while back to A440. Well, as it turns out, A432, if you add those numbers together through a process called Diophantine equationing, you get 4 plus 3 plus 2 gives you a value, which is 9. And so the solfège sequences works around that 9 system, that nonative system. And so I looked at that and tried some stuff. It was interesting, seemed to do something, but it wasn't quite effective enough. So I ended up looking into other sonic research that others had done and came across the Royal Rife technologies. Royal Rife was a scientist who studied a lot in mapping the vibrational qualities of sound against different cellular types in the body, and realized that all of the different cell types, like the difference between a kidney cell or an eye cell or whatever, had their own ideal oscillation rates. And he mapped all of these frequencies out. So I started looking into the Royal Rife technologies, trying to figure out how to compare that against the solfège sequences, try and figure out which numbers that Rife had mapped that fell within either a 3, 6, or 9 harmonic when you added the digits up together of that particular frequency, for example, 432. And from there, applied my own research and came up with the kinesonic concept. So since then, I ended up making other maps, and they all have different frequencies. I had a person that had an acne problem, and so I looked into some frequencies that correlated through the Rife system to dermatological conditions, and used my own formulas to come up with a system that is purely sound-based. There actually was also not only a kinesonic, but I did do a kinesynoptic that also had the corollary audio frequencies in visual form. So I could kind of have a double impact effect on the kinesthetic level, and found out that the thing actually got rid of my rosacea. I had a problem with rosacea for years and years and years. Struggled with it. And it'd come and it'd go and come and it'd go. And I made a map for somebody else that had a problem. They couldn't even use Proactive. In fact, Proactive made their skin condition worse. So they were looking for a solution that was non-medicinal, let's say. And I applied my think space, as it were, to trying something that worked for my case as well as theirs. And then I had somebody else come along and say, hey, do you think that would work for a stomach problem? So I looked at their problem, compared that against the Rife technologies, and again applied my own theories to developing another trilaterally balanced sine wave approach with a kinesonic, and actually gave them some relief from their problem. And then I ended up doing some other types of maps too. I had a friend have a friend who had a tachycardia problem with the heart. Malformed heart, basically, at birth, and had been on medication. She called me up one night in a panic because she couldn't get her medicine until Monday, and it was a Friday. And she's like, is there something you can do? And I'm like, well, I don't know, but why don't you come over and tell me about your condition? So she told me about her condition, and I looked it up, compared it again against the Rife frequencies, and applied my own formula to it and came up with a map in about 13 minutes. She sat down and listened to it for 10. And to my knowledge, she hasn't had another cardiac arrest, as it were, fibrillation anyway, since, and hasn't had to take medicine. Well, the MK111 really started taking off well when a friend of mine who had some problems with first stage Parkinson's, and also with just generally endocrine problems from too much alcoholism at way too early of an age. He got rid of the alcohol a long time ago, but he's always suffered from that, his endocrine system. And so he was on a daily regimen of morphine for 8 years. And he started using the Kinesonic MK111 and was able to wean himself completely off of morphine. And again, all he has to do now is imagine that tone and it kicks in. So he's completely off morphine, has been for about 2 or 3 years now, I think. So I started having some success with these devices, and I wanted to go public with them. They are all free. I will never charge for anything that I develop as a developer and inventor that has to do with health and wellness reconditioning. That's the least I can do. There's other things I do that can generate revenues to pay my rent and whatnot. But the health-related stuff, that will always be free. But that presents a problem. So that's why I started really diving heavily into statutes and the law. So I still work as an IT director. I'm working with the people at New Earth Nation right now. I am new to joining their team. That actually happened at the first part of this month. I've been talking to some of the folks there for about 2 months. I signed up with them actually last April, this past, but was kind of slow to come on board because I was, prior to that, working as an IT director for an orbiting satellite mission with the National Space Society. I ended up, unfortunately, having to leave that project because they were forcing me into contract with the IRS and the federal government. And I don't do contracts with them anymore. They've caused way too much pain. And it's always a win-lose situation. They always win and I always lose. So I've eliminated all of my state and federal contracts and have basically declared non-dependent sovereignty, I guess. I really don't care for the word sovereignty because really I think the only one that can be sovereign is my creator. But in any event, so I'm just functioning as a free person or free man, actually more accurately, upon the land. And as long as I'm doing what I can to be a contributor to the community and not cause anybody any injury in any way to them or their property, or violate valid contracts, as far as I'm concerned, I should be able to do pretty much anything I need to do with my work. So I'm getting ready to gear back up and go back to work in not only the health and wellness related stuff I'm working on, but also the energy devices that I like to build. I've been playing around a little bit with some of the work of a guy named Viktor Grebenikov. He developed a flying platform back in the early 90s. Unfortunately, he passed away at the first part of, I think it was 2001, he passed away. And all of his plans were confiscated. He was doing research on how beetles, which have really small wings for how big their bodies are able to fly. And so I've been looking into that technology. I've also been talking a lot with other folks, and not a lot with any one of those other folks, but I've been talking with people like John Searle, his team over at Searle Magnetics, which has fundamentally been Russell Anderson. I haven't reached out to Fernando Morris yet. He's with Searle Magnetics. And a lot of my study has been in magnetics, hence the recording engineer and stuff, as well as the electronic prototype developer. I spent 6 years working in low voltage magnetics and recording systems, and spent 2 years working in high voltage systems, basically electric drives. We built systems from 175 kilovolt amps all the way up to 650 kilovolt amps. They were all bidirectional drives, so the load could be hooked up on either side. Really fascinating work. I loved it. But the government was kind of like, well, we don't really need all of these electric drives because we still got gas to power engines with. So the company I was with ended up getting less and less funding because they were dumping more and more money into oil and let's call it clean coal technologies. Humans haven't been able to get past the idea that they have to burn something to get energy. And even today, the push is to find something to burn. And I don't think in those realms at all. For me, I think purely from a wave-particle interaction think space.
Yeah.
And so that's really where my work is leading me. I will absolutely continue to do IT-related work because, as I said, it helps me with being able to distribute my media effectively now without having to go to an investor and say, hey, can I have this much money to make this many CDs? So all this media I've developed today is what's called soft media that you just download. It doesn't cost me anything to produce that stuff except time, but it doesn't really cost me anything in terms of materials to develop. And it's really the cheapest way for me to be not only a multimedia production house, as it were, but also my own distribution firm. So that's pretty much where everything's at, I guess, up to date. So do you have any questions for me specifically?
And yes, we'll get back to some questions with you, Troy, right after this break, now that we've caught up on our time. And listeners, we hope that you'll stay tuned with us, because in the last segment of the show, we'll be talking to Troy about his involvement in national and international law. But till then, we'll be right back after this segment to talk more about energy. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Richard Steinitz. I'm the author of Murder Over the Border, an Israeli detective novel, and Kaplan's Quest, a historical novel with an Israeli connection. I hope you like the books. You can follow me on Twitter, on Facebook, and even contact me by email on richard.steinitz@gmail.com. And I've enjoyed being here on K-Wave 6 Radio with Kirk.
Hi, this is Pat Kammer, author of Love's Voice Changes You, Book 1. And I now have Book 2, which is called Hello Awesome, Message from Spirit in Pat's Patters. Buy your book from Amazon.com.
Hi, this is Amy Young of JSJ Phone. We are providers of Junior, iPhone, iPad, iPod, also Samsung, Sony, Nokia parts and accessories at very good quality and low prices. We sell to individuals, and companies have 3 to 5 days delivery time by DHL or UPS. We do delivery in 24 hours after payment confirmed. For more information, see our website www.jsjphone.com www.jsjphone.com. Contact me, Amy Young, mailbox emy@jsjphone.com, or by phone 0086 13418696395, by Skype emy.yang2012.
Hi, this is Kate McKay, the Mass Motivator at kate-mckay.com. You're tuned in to the amazing K-Wave 6 Radio.
Hi, and welcome back to K-Wave 6 Radio. Today, again, my guest is Troy Mathisen of the Mathisen System. Before our break, we were talking a lot about energy and the Mathisen System, and his MK111 and his healing properties and all of that. So, Troy, if you don't mind, continue from there.
Thank you. Back on November 15th of 2010, I'd had a really long few days in a row. I was building a website project that had a delivery schedule that was near impossible to make. I didn't make the schedule, but I ended up falling asleep on a couch, sitting upright, and about 4 hours later, snorted awake with this thought. And the thought was pretty simple. And that thought was the birth of the Mathisen system that I developed over the following, basically, year. And that thought was that all existence is a manifestation of energy space and its effect on matter. And the pure ether space, as it were, which we'll call space with no particles, let's say, just pure space, which I always call ether. I know they call it different things these days. Ether's kind of an outdated word. But the thought was that all energy space is represented by one thing. That one thing is represented as the number 9. If all else sums to 9, you get one thing. That is the lesson. So I bolted awake and I was like, aha, I got the answer. And I sat down and created a 9 by 9 multiplication table. And I ended up with the typical 9 by 9 values in each of the column rows. And I looked at them and went, well, that doesn't tell me anything. Gee. So I looked at all of the double-digit integer values, like, for example, 6 times 3 equaled 18. And on that row column, I did what's called a digit sum, or a Diophantine equation, and added those two numbers together and replaced it with a single-digit representation. When I did that, I ended up with a 9 by 9 grid of single-digit values, and they revealed the pattern to me. So I was like, well, okay, well, let's look at where all the 9s are. So I took this table, and instead of using number values, I assigned each one of the values, 1 through 9, a color value. And I made 1 red and worked my way up through the color spectrum all the way up to 9, which was white. And actually, I'm sorry, 1 was brown, 2 was pretty much red. Anyway, so I looked at this, and I noticed that 9 made this very interesting pattern that all of the dots were along the right edge of the table and along the bottom row. In that pattern, there were also 4 other dots that were central within those other colored square. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. Let's look at 1 and see what the pattern for that is. So I took these different colored dots and put each one on its own layer. So I could turn a layer off and then look at the next one and then the other one and then mix them and match them and add them up and stuff and see them. So when I looked at pattern 1, I noticed it made a little box with 2 orientation markers. And there was basically it was at an angle, 90-degree angle on the screen. And there was a dot way up in the top left corner and a dot way down in the bottom corner. And I went, well, there's a box with what looks like to be an orientation marker. Well, let's look at 8, because 1 plus 8 makes 9. So I looked at 8, and it was actually 90 degrees juxtaposed to exactly what 1 was. And I went, aha, another box with an orientation marker. What can I use that for? Well, let's look at 2. So I turned everything off except for layer 2, and it basically made 2 sets of dots on the top left screen, 2 sets of dots in the middle right next to each other, and 2 dots on the lower. So I looked at 7, because 2 plus 7 makes 9, and it made the opposite, 90 degrees juxtaposed pattern. Well, then I looked at 6 and 3, and it made kind of like a squashed O, or a torus shape, an ellipse, let's call it, that had 3 orientation marker dots above and below. And I went, that kind of looks like a coil. Vortex energy in, vortex energy out. Let's look at 6. And 6 did the same thing, 90 degrees juxtaposed. So I was like, this is kind of really interesting how this is all working out. Let's look at 4 and 5. So I turned everything off except 4 and looked at it, and it made a circle on the top left portion and the lower right portion. It made basically 3 dots up, 3 dots below. And then when I switched over to 5 instead, it made the 90-degree opposite of that. So I applied those shapes to the think space. And I made 1 and 8, which makes 9. Orientation markers for pole values. In other words, pole 1, pole 2. And actually, it's not even pole 1 and pole 2. It's actually initial energy point and information point. So I put those, you can't measure anything until you have a starting point and where you're measuring out to. So I used 1 for the initial energy point value and 8 for the information point, for the pole related information. Then I looked at 2 and 7, which made basically an X shape on the screen. And I applied a number value, which is basically the number phi, which is 1.618. And I went, okay, well, we'll use that as the figure for planar information. Then I looked at 4 and 5, which made the circle when you turn them both on. And I went, okay, well, we'll apply that for the pi value, 3.1415. So then I had these other 2 left over, 6 and 3. 3 and 6 made that ellipse with the vortex in, vortex out kind of V patterns pointing to the inside of the ellipse. And I said, okay, well, this is electromagnetic energy will apply to this. So what is the electromagnetic energy value, the information point and initial energy point value? When I looked at this, without 9 being turned on, and I turned them all on, it made this really beautiful little kind of flower pattern. And I turned on 9, and it filled up all of the dots on the grid, that 9 by 9 grid. And I went, aha. So I'm going to use 9 as kind of like a what's called the gnomon with a G, G-N-O-M-O-N. Gnomon is an old technique for putting a stick in the ground and watching the shadow against the ground to find your direction. And so I was going, okay, well, a gnomon, ground, okay, a common, a neutral. So basically 9 became the common. And all of a sudden I was like, aha, so this is how it all works. Now I know how 9 can represent the universe. And at this point, all we have is literally planar values, orbital values, electromagnetic value, and a orientation marker. Well, actually, the orientation marker would be the magnetic value, let's call it, is 1 and 8. Electrical is 3 and 6. Planar is 2 and 7. And spherical is 4 and 5. And I started playing around with this, and that's really where the Mathisen system started. And so I was applying this think space towards building the equivalent of a quantum physics calculator / simulator, where you could take your voltage and your magnetic field density, apply it against a distance, whether it was a planar distance in the case of a wave, or a spherical orbit, using values 4 and 5, and then comparing those against each other, because even spherical things have a distance that they are away from their initial point of origin, in the case of like atoms with electrons orbiting them.
Troy, let me interrupt you for a moment here. For those who have been following the show fairly regularly, they know that I was teaching metaphysics back in the early 90s up until the early 2000s. And the number 9 has a value in numerology that generally just means the end. In other words, it's the highest single number that you can get. So it is the end. We also understand that even in mathematics that 9 plus 9 or 9 times 2 is 18, and in numerology you have to add any group of numbers together to come up with at least the highest value, or at least a value of one number. In other words, if you put say 9 and 1 together, you come up with 10, so you're down to a 1. That has a value of its own. So basically, unless you're coming up with master numbers, which are basically 11, 22, and 33, most cultures will end right there at 33. Some go a little bit further. But anyhow, 9 and 9 is 18. 3 times 9 is 27. And you add these numbers together, they come up with a 9. 3 times 9 is 36, etc. And it always comes up to a 9. 9 always has the ability, if 9 times 9, 9 plus 9, if the values are still with 9s, you're going to come up with a 9. It's the only number in all of the numbers that actually you can multiply, add, and divide and still end up with the numerical value of 9. Does that have any play in what you're talking about here?
I believe so. For anybody that wants to kind of play around with the dot matrices I came up with and be able to turn layers on and off, and just kind of see the think space behind it, I do have a site in development. There's a lot of missing information. I mean, a lot of missing information. But if you go to themathisinsystem.net, Mathisen is spelled Mathisen. The Mathisinsystem.net has a navigational button up at the top of the screen that says widgets. If you click on the widgets button, you'll get to see not only the 9x9 table I originally came up with and started playing with, but you'll also see the two matrices that I came up with. One is called the M6 matrix, and the M6 matrix I use to factor orbital systems. Okay, like if I'm dealing with particles and orbits, like electron orbits, I use the M6 matrix in my factoring, and the matrices are scalable, so they basically become the equivalent of a fractal tile. So if you look at that 6x6 matrix, which is where it got its name M6, you'll see that if you were to take that block of 36 dots and apply it up to the left, down to the bottom, or left or right of that matrix, it is scalable in any and every direction without losing any integrity. Everything always sums to 9 in the system. The M9 matrix I use for factoring wave propagation or planar motion. So that's why I ended up coming up with the two different matrices. But those little widgets on that Mathisinsystem.net website are kind of fun because you can go in there and click on the numbers at the bottom of the screen, like the red one, and it'll turn that layer on and off. And then you can compare that, turn all the layers off by clicking on each of the numbers until it's basically a white number face on a black background. And then just look at the pattern for 9, which ends up in the center from bottom left to upper right, or the spine of those other values. And you'll notice that if you click, for example, 1, and then you turn on 8, it's sympathetic or mirrors what the other value does. And my favorite one is the M6 to play with because it reveals interesting little patterns as you're turning the number values on and off so that you can see the color versus not. There's also a thing you can turn the symbols on and off if you find those confusing and want to just look at the colors. But yeah, it's this interesting little thing, and this is really what I applied as a think space to developing the products that I developed, like the coil. I was looking for a mathematically uniform pattern, and if you go to Facebook and type in the Mathisen system, that will take you to more information where there's some other types of graphics. You can get a little sense of where some of the, like the coil came from. I actually have a star-shaped coil in there too that produces a mathematically uniform field, let's call it. So that, you know, some stuff to look at there. That's really all I can say about where the Mathisen system came from, but I really wanted to develop a system of what makes matter react the way it does within pure energy space. And so the Mathisen system is really just a quantum theory on how pure energy space affects matter without regard for the matter. The quantum simulator I'm developing will basically give you a big screen with controls on the left where you enter in your values. And then you apply those values to the energy space, which basically is just a black empty window. But from there, you can pull molecules. They're virtual molecules. They're just represented as an image on the screen. And add, for example, carbon atoms to that energy space and then play around with the electromagnetic charge space to see how it's affecting those carbon atoms. And you can eventually add other types of particles. The idea behind the quantum simulator is to figure out how to make nano machines, nano pumps, for being able to pull water out of the air by building the equivalent of a solar panel, but instead of collecting UVC energy, it's actually pulling H2O molecules out of the air and pulling that in through a condensation plate and pulling it into a collector, a trap.
All right, tell me this. You're talking about pulling water out of basically thin air. So how is this any different from, say, a regular house dehumidifier?
Well, a dehumidifier is not going to produce drinkable water. And neither is the collection plate concept using these nano pumps. I basically wanted to be able to dope a surface with billions of little pumps that are optimized for pulling in H2O molecules. But there are other particles that really needed to be added to the water. You don't want to drink pure H2O. You need calcium. You need other minerals in that water for it to really be healthy for you to drink. So there's this thing I want to develop. It's a water purification system. It actually rejuvenates the water once it's been collected through a magnetic vortex process that I use the coil for to generate the rotational field that makes the water spin at a super high rate, at this millions of RPM.
So basically what you're talking about is just it will make drinkable water from what it's doing.
That just recondition the water so that it's basically rejuvenated as if it just poured out of a mountain spring, basically, after it's gone through all of the forces it's subject to through the heating, as it's below the surface. Anyway.
And with that, we're going to take our last break. Then we'll be back with Troy Mathisen, who will continue on with his interest and his involvement with national and international law. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Megan Serleski, author of Who Am I? How My Daughter Taught Me to Let Go and Live Again. And I am on K-Wave 6 Radio.
Do you need a website or a webmaster for your business or hobby? A wordsmith for a research paper or for a script, an article, or for a language translator? Do you need an audio or visual project created or edited? Contact K-Wave 6 Productions at www.kwave6productions.tk for all your website, writing, audio, and visual needs. Our rates are competitive and our services are excellent. That's K-Wave 6 Productions at www.kwave6productions.tk or email us at info@kwave6productions.tk.
Hi, I'm Doug Harold. You're listening to the K-Wave 6 Radio with my friend Kurt Spencer. I'm with Time and Eternity, timeandeternity.net. I'm really glad you're listening to the K-Wave 6 Radio.
Hello and welcome back to K-Wave 6 Radio. Today my guest is again Troy Mathisen of the Mathisen System. He's been talking a lot about his energy work and understanding what the MK111 is about. The M is for Mathisen, the K is
Kinasonic.
Thank you. And now we're going to actually let Troy run with his involvement with national and international law, why he got involved in it, and what he is doing, and how he can encourage you, the listener, the citizen of the world, how you can actually work to stand up for your own abilities, for your own rights, and the rights of others, and returning us not only to common law, but to natural law. So he's going to explain to us now about what all of this means and, how you can get involved in it. So with that, Troy, tell us how you actually got involved in all of this, what we consider be the law and the legal system.
Well, so after having this stroke of brilliance, as it were, brain fart, however you want to look at it, in the first quarter of 2011, I was pretty much 45 to 60 days into the development of the Mathisen system. It became usable for me as a think space to start developing new product types. And the types of products that were starting to manifest from that, which very little information is available on, by the way, because there are companies that don't want these technologies exposed. I started diving real heavy into law and study of that. So I kind of had to put the Mathisen system on the back burner because I was still working a lot as an IT developer for various companies I've been working with over the years, and really dug into what is law. And I'd always had a pretty good sense of right and wrong, and that's really where concepts of law and jurisprudence come from. I mean, you can say, yeah, I'm going to do this, and you can even sign your name to a piece of paper to re-accord, which is where the word record comes from. First, if it's a verbal contract, it's an accord. But to verify that acknowledgement or that commitment, you sign your name. That becomes a re-accord or a record. And so the courts pretty much work off of that guise. First they come to an accord, and then they expect you to sign your name to something so that now they can prove to somebody else that may not have been present during that accord, show that re-accord, that record. And so I started looking into not only what I about divine law, and below that top-level form of law is natural law, and those relate to things like what I'm working on with the Mathisen system, laws like gravity, electromagnetic interaction, that kind of stuff. I started looking at the lower forms of law, and I really focused on the system of Roman Curia law, which is where basically all the laws in the Western world come from. They are basically a creation of the Vatican. And so as I dug into Roman Curia law, I looked at all these other forms that are below that. Roman civil law, for example. I looked into merchant law and family law and traffic law and all these other things, and realized that everything about law that comes from the Roman Curia system is all about accords and re-accords or records. So their entire system is based on a, yeah, I said I'm going to do it, and yeah, I'm going to prove it because I wrote my name down. So as it turns out, on an individual level, each and every man, woman, and child, the only effect that statute law has on that individual is one of two ways, either through consent to contract or through force and intimidation. And so when you start looking at the existing laws, you're basically down to two options. Tell them, no, I don't honor your system. I'm not a part of your system. I have no interest in being a part of your system, and you have no standing jurisdiction or authority over me until I am willing to consent. So if you'd like to do business, then we need to come to a mutually beneficial arrangement, because the very nature of business implies mutually beneficial. In other words, win-win. Nobody would be willing to go into business knowing full well they're going to get the short end of the stick and actually be injured in some way through that interaction while the other person is benefiting. So when you look at the law of the land in this country, which is supposed to be constitutional law, those principles were set forth by our forefathers to ensure that men, women, and people in general are born with unalienable rights that were given to them through their creator.
Now wait, you're talking about entering into a contract between government and people, and you're talking about having a win-win situation. How can you actually say a win-win situation when you sign up for the military? There, after you're sworn in, you have to sign a contract with the military saying this is your responsibilities, that's their responsibilities, but they're sending you into something that is not a win-win. And then now, as we're seeing, at least in the U.S. military, veterans of all wars are now not able to get the services that they need, and they're put on these extensively long waiting lists. So what is the recourse for all of this?
Okay, well, so if it's not business, win-win, in other words, right, it's not anything beyond a crime, because someone is suffering injury through the acts of another or act of another. And so these contracts, like you sign up for military service, they are only a valid contract as long as it's win-win. That's business. If it's not win-win, it's a crime. Does that make sense? So you enter into contract, and at the end of the day, you're being injured in some way by that contract. That negates the validity of that contract. And at that point, a crime is being committed. At that point, you have one of two options. You can file a complaint or you can file a claim. Now, in the case of the government, they are classified as public employees. They are classified as a person under the law, under Title 18. So that person is basically using their legal fiction, right, which is their ID, right, and not claiming anything beyond limited liability. So when they sign a contract with you, you, the man, might be getting injured by them, the person, okay? And the person is literally nothing more than a legal definition. It is an agreement that me, the man, and me, the legal fiction that the government created through the issuance of my birth certificate, are two separate people. We are all born in the Western world with a birth certificate, and that means we are all born with dual citizenship status, as it were. But one of us isn't really a citizen. One of us is actually a man or a woman. The other one is a citizen. That is a legal definition. So what's happening with these people in court and how they get into court is we don't know the law. So when an officer pulls you over and says, I need to see your identification, the appropriate response would be, you're looking at it. I'm Troy the man, right? I don't want to reach for my pocket and hand him my driver's license, because what I'm doing now is representing myself as a fraud, as a legal fiction. So, but that's not me. That's what they know me as, because the only thing they've ever met me through is my signature through my contracts, like signing up with SSI so that I could get a job. Now, who told me I have to have SSI before they'll even employ me? Well, the companies did, because the companies are entered into contract as a corporation with the authority or the license to practice that business. Well, the problem with the license is that most people don't really understand the origin of that word. It is a permission from the Vatican or the church to be licentious, which means to be immoral and depraved. So you give them money, they give you a license, and until you have somehow violated the amount of depravity that they've allowed you to have in their own mind, which is subject to the individual's choice who is in the position of power and authority, whether you're being too licentious or not. So that way they can pull your license and cause you more injury, which means more money in their pocket. And so these contracts need to be dissolved for people who are being persecuted by these contracts, because the minute that the contract is no longer mutually beneficial, it can be deemed null and void, but only by the person who's being caused injury, because it's not a valid contract once injury begins to occur. It's now a crime. It's not business. So the way to get to the system turned around is to not try to figure out ways to beat the courts by spending all your time learning statute law and all of these other principles that fall under the classification of Roman Curia law, but to take it back down to natural law principles, where there's really only two maxims. The first one being, if there is no injured party, and that implies that that individual has not been injured physically or their property has not been harmed, right? Their true rightful allodial title property. If there is no injury to the person or their property, or violation of a valid and verifiable contract, then there is no crime. That's the first maxim. The second maxim is, if a crime has occurred, there must be redress of grievance and a path to successful resolution towards restitution. If we could bring it back down to that and almost in effect return to like a 10 Commandments concept and throw out 66.5 million statutes that apply in the Western world, under things like UCC, Admiralty Maritime Law, if we can basically just start dishonoring contracts that are causing us injury, just saying, hey, you didn't tell me this was going to cause me harm, and now I'm getting hurt. I'm not going to honor this contract anymore. Thank you very much. It's been nice doing business with you, but you're not playing nice. So I'm going to walk away and I'm going to go over here and play a different game with people that I can do business with instead of people who are going to victimize me through this so-called contract that you are benefiting so greatly through at my expense.
All right, Troy, thank you very much, but, well, we've pretty much run out of time here. So in closing thoughts, do you have anything that you'd like to tell us about the remaining last 2 minutes of the show?
In 2 minutes, start with being a person of integrity. Conduct yourself honorably, justly, with righteousness, and mercifully. That's the first thing. The other path is to walk away from their system. Well, that implies you need another option. And I would highly suggest anybody listening on this recording to go to New Earth Nation and read every word you can find throughout that entire portal. They have it's basically a treaty. It's an international treaty. It's got 86 articles in that treaty. They're getting ready here, hopefully within the month. So let's say mid-October, to have a global constitution. So once you go there, read that treaty, and if you agree to that treaty, at the bottom of the page, you will find a button that says Declare Your Sovereignty. That will remove you from corporate jurisdiction of this government that is actually not really a government. It's corporate enterprise acting as government. But it can only happen through contract. So that would be my best, and that's what I've done. I've declared my non-dependent sovereignty as a micronation, and the micronation concept is explained at newearthnation.org. But I would highly encourage everybody to look at New Earth and see what they're doing there. And that is definitely a path out of their game. Other than that, do not end up in court. If you get charged with something, you want to take care of that charge against you through paperwork filings that must be done immediately upon notification of charge. You don't want to wait until, 6 weeks until your first court appearance and then go to court. Do not go to court. Once you are in court, you will have no standing or jurisdiction nor authority. That's their room now. They've taken it away from the people. The courts are operating as a private foreign invader, and you will never win in their room. So your best bet is to form your independent common law grand juries or your natural justice tribunals. That's the path away from their game. So now you have a means to face true justice through a court of law, a court of truth and truth towards justice, instead of what we have in America today, which are courts of equity that are courts of lies toward revenue.
Well, thank you very much, Troy. We ask that you stick around for just a moment. I do have some announcements to make for our listeners. All of our shows, all of our episodes can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, podcast.com, RSS feed, and on YouTube. All players are computer and smartphone friendly, so you can listen while you're on the go. And all episodes are free. They have been in the past, and they will always remain so. You can also subscribe to each one of the players for automatic updates when our shows air every Tuesday and Thursday. You can also subscribe to our website and to our blog for updates that come through on the blog. We also ask that you support our advertisers. If you missed their advertisement during the show, you don't have to go back and play the whole show to listen to it. Just go to our website and hit the advertisers page, and you will find links directly to their websites, and you can contact them straight through that. If you have any suggestions and or comments, please send them to suggestions@kwave6radio.tk. That's suggestions@kwave6, that's the number 6, radio.tk. If you have any other questions that you would like to ask that aren't related to the show indirectly or directly, send your information to, or send your email to info@kwave6, the number 6, radio.tk. That's info@kwave6radio.tk. And Troy, I want to thank you once again for being here. You know that there's going to be a part B for each one of your shows, talking about energy and for law. So we look forward to having you back here again, and thank you very much for being here.
All right. Love, best wishes and blessings to you.
And for all our listeners, thank you for being here, and we'll see you soon. Take care and be well.
Thank you for being part of our audience. For more information about K-Wave 6 Radio and the services we offer, go to www.kwave6radio.tk. Have a wonderful day.